Hi, welcome. I'm Christopher Charles, and this is Andrew Spittler. Thank you for joining us today for a presentation on short-term leases and the Super Bowl. I'm super grateful to be here with you today. I was telling my wife this morning at breakfast just how thankful I am for the opportunity to get up in the morning and go to a job that I love to do with people that I like and in a community that that's professional and just fun to be with. So thank you guys and ladies for joining us today. Should be a pretty fun presentation, hopefully. But today's topic is going to be on short-term rentals, or vacation rentals as I call it, and the Super Bowl. This is super relevant here in Arizona because, of course, next January, February, Arizona is going to be the entertainment hub of the world. It's kind of a perfect storm, or just the stars aligning with everything that's going to be here in our backyard. And we put that in your materials, some of the highlights. We're going to have the Fiesta Bowl, the Cactus Bowl, the Barrett-Jackson car auction, not only the Super Bowl, but also the Pro Bowl, which is fantastic to have that, and then also the Waste Management Phoenix Open as well. So and on top of all that, we're going to have perfect weather. So there's going to be people vacationing here from literally all over the world, and so what that means is there's going to be unusually high demand for rental properties here in the Valley. Those of you that are joining us on the web, please feel free to send us questions as we go through the materials this morning. You can email those, or I guess it's instant message the questions. You just click on the forum tab, and we'll try and answer those as we go along. We want this to be interactive, not just a lecture. Speaking of the Super Bowl, how many Arizona Cardinals does it take to win a Super Bowl championship?
Ooh, I'm going to say quite a few. Let's go with 53.
The answer is we don't know. And we probably won't know this year either, because you might have heard that Darnell Dockett, our star defensive tackle, just had a season-ending injury, just tore his ACL. So probably won't find out this year either. What do you call 53 millionaires sitting around watching the Super Bowl in Texas?
Now that one's a lot easier. I'm going to bet Cowboys is the answer to that question.
Dallas Cowboys is the correct answer. One quick story, and then we'll get into the materials. I actually had the opportunity. I'm a huge Arizona Cardinals fan. My family has had Cardinals season tickets since they came to the Valley. I think it was '85 when we used to be over at Sun Devil Stadium. So I'm a huge Cardinals fan. I actually had the opportunity to go to the Super Bowl to see the Cardinals play the Steelers in 2009. I won the tickets on one of those radio call-in contests they had, and to show you how scarce the tickets were, I only got one ticket. I was single at the time, so it was easy for me to get away and zip over to Florida and catch the game. So I get there right before the game starts, and I go to my seat, and the seats were pretty good. It wasn't the lower section, but it was the next to the lowest section, about 10 rows up. I go to my seat just before the game starts, and there's somebody in my seat. It was kind of awkward. I didn't want to make a big deal about it, and I happened to notice that just a couple rows in front of me there was an empty seat. So I just thought, all right, I'll just go see if anybody's sitting in that seat. So I go down to the empty seat. There's an elderly guy in his 80s that's sitting there all by himself, and I ask him, I said, excuse me, is this seat taken? And he says, well, actually, this is my wife's seat, but she recently passed away, so no, the seat's available. He said. I said, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear that. He's like, yeah, it's hard. My wife and I went to every single Super Bowl together for the last 20 years. So I was like, oh wow, I'm really sorry to hear that. I said, well, couldn't you find any family or friends to go to the game with you? He's like, no, they're all at the funeral. So. Even bigger fan than I was. All right, so let me tell you real quick, just kind of bird's eye view, what we're going to cover today: vacation rentals and the Super Bowl. What is different or unique about short-term rentals than just your typical, Arizona Association of Realtors residential lease agreement? What is different enough that mandates a special CLE on that topic? So we'll go through some of the intricacies and nuances, over the next 45 minutes. I think the biggest issue is whether the Landlord-Tenant Act applies, whether the Arizona Residential Landlord-Tenant Act applies. So I'll spend some time on discussing when it applies, when doesn't it apply, why is it relevant, why do we care, why does it matter if it applies. We will talk about some tax issues, Arizona state tax issues, transient lodging taxes, state tax regarding incidental expenses. And then we'll also talk about federal income tax and a very important exception that applies to short-term rentals. In discussing the relevance of the Landlord-Tenant Act and short-term rentals, one of the focuses will be on evictions. When is a owner required to judicially evict a tenant, and when can an owner actually non-judicially perform a lockout or non-judicial eviction? Andrew's going to talk to us about the importance of doing thorough, responsible background checks, credit checks, background checks. Who should we be renting our properties to? And by the way, of course, kind of the reason for the topic today was that a lot of our audience, being professionals, owning property, many of them owning property here in Arizona, may be considering actually renting one or more of your properties to vacationers in January, February. And Andrew will tell you why you might want to think about that and what the going rate for rental properties here in Arizona is for next year. I included in our materials an exemplar vacation rental agreement that you can use. We'll walk through that and touch on some of the key provisions of that rental agreement. And then to wrap up, Andrew will talk about VRBO and kind of some platforms that owners can use to market their property and secure some rental agreements. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the first topic, and that is why are vacation rentals relevant? And I kind of touched on that at the very beginning, and that's that Arizona, the Valley, is going to be the entertainment hub of the whole world for January, February, with all of the different sporting and entertainment events. And I just put a few here. I'm sure there's tons others that I left off that lots of people are going to be interested in from all over the country, all over the world. So there will be high demand. We're already seeing on VRBO and other rental sites properties already being listed, already being rented for next January, February. So really now's the time to do it, that if you or one of your clients is contemplating renting their property, now's the time to get it on the market. All right. The Arizona Residential Landlord-Tenant Act provides tenants with some pretty significant rights and privileges under the law. Some of those rights I highlighted in your materials. Actually, I did not. This is just my notes. So I'll just briefly go over some of the most significant rights, privileges to tenants under the Landlord-Tenant Act. Most importantly, for our purposes today, I think, is that if the Landlord-Tenant Act applies, then the owner has to judicially evict the tenant pursuant to the Landlord-Tenant Act and the Arizona Rules of Eviction Action. So the landlord/owner has to actually file a lawsuit. Before that, has to give a written notice, usually 5 or 10 days, and then has to file a lawsuit to evict the tenant. So that's number one. Judicial evictions are required. Written notices are required. Third, there's limitations on security deposits. The amount of the security deposit cannot exceed 1.5 times the monthly rental amount. And fourth, the landlord cannot require the tenant to prepay the rent. Okay, so those are the main reasons why owners would want to avoid the application of the Landlord-Tenant Act concerning the rental of their vacation property. The good news for investors, owners, is that transient lodging is exempted from the Landlord-Tenant Act. ARS 33-1308, Section 4, provides that transient occupancy in a hotel, motel, or recreational lodging is excluded from the Landlord-Tenant Act. So the question then is, what is transient lodging? What is recreational lodging? And I put a couple of cases in your materials, and then there's some statutes here to go off of, but there's not real crystal clear guidance on that issue. But I think the most persuasive guidance comes in ARS 44-5070, Section F. And that's actually a statute dealing with taxation of transient lodging. But that statute, the legislature defines what a transient lodger is. And a transient means any person who, either at the person's own expense, let me spare you all those details. A transient means any person who rents a property, a residential property, on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, or less than 30 days. So that's what it boils down to. The takeaway is that as long as the rental period is for less than 30 days, it will be transient lodging and exempted or excluded from the Landlord-Tenant Act. So that's from a taxation statute, not directly on point, but does give us some guidance as to the legislature's definition of transient lodging. There's a couple of cases that I attached to your materials. One is a criminal law case that I asked our law clerk, our law student law clerk, to help find some authority on this issue, and she sent me a criminal law case. But the criminal law case actually is, I think, instructive. It shows the Court of Appeals reasoning, analysis regarding what is transient lodging and what are transient lodgers' rights under Arizona law. What are their property rights? And basically what they say is that if it's transient lodging, like in a hotel or short-term stay, the transient lodger has no right to privacy and does not have exclusive right to the property, and the owner has the right to enter the property and perform a non-judicial lockout. The Court of Appeals doesn't use the term non-judicial lockout, but says can go in and change the locks, which is tantamount to a lockout. So that case is a little bit instructive on what is transient lodging. There's another case that we're going to get to on page 4 of your materials, and that's State versus Weekly. Horton versus Harstook. Horton versus Harstook on page 4 of your materials, 2009 WL 2244503. That case dealt with CC&Rs, the Court of Appeals interpretation of CC&Rs. There's a group of homeowners in the community that wanted to preclude other homeowners from renting their properties on a short-term basis. There was nothing in the CC&Rs that expressly precluded transient lodging or vacation rentals, and it did expressly provide the owners of property in the community with the right to lease their properties, to rent the properties. The plaintiff's position that wanted to prevent the short-term rentals was that the CC&Rs limited the property's use to residential use and argued that transient lodging was not residential use. So the issue became, are these actual tenants under a lease agreement, or are they transient lodgers? So that was the focus. There was no focus on whether the Landlord-Tenant Act applied. It was really just interpreting the CC&Rs, but the reasoning in that case was a little bit different than what I'm telling you all here today. The Court of Appeals held that in order for it to be a transient lodger, you need to have no lease agreement. And the Court of Appeals basically said if there's a lease agreement for any term, even if it's for a day, that's not transient lodging, and that's an actual tenant. So anyway, just want to make you aware of that, but I think for good reason. That's an unreported case, but did want to make you aware of that, because that is a little bit contrary to the position here that anything that I'm taking, anything under 30 days qualifies as transient lodging. By the way, the reason that I became interested in this topic is not necessarily because of the Super Bowl, although this definitely helped. but because I have a number of clients that own apartment complexes that their business model is targeting short-term renters, and like short-term renters, like 1 week, 2 week, 3 week basis. And their business model fails if they have to go in and do a judicial eviction anytime one of their tenants holds over or doesn't pay the rent. So it's critical to them that they have the right to do a non-judicial lockout. So I just say that to let the audience know that most short-term rentals, extended stays, short-term apartment homes, transient lodging facilities here in the community take that same position, that as long as the stay is for less than 30 days, no judicial eviction required, and the Landlord-Tenant Act does not apply. And by the way, there's been hundreds, if not 1,000 or more, cases where this issue has been addressed just over the last 10 years or so that my clients are aware, where this has never been overturned, this position, at least at the Justice Court level. All right. So let's talk briefly about a lockout versus eviction. The good news, and I think I touched on that already, is since the Landlord-Tenant Act doesn't apply if it's less than 30 days, the landlord can do, the owner, let's not mix up our terms, the owner can do a non-judicial lockout. That's a kind of a complicated process that would require an entirely different, 1 to 3 hour CLE, just talking about lockouts, commercial lockouts, non-judicial lockouts. So we don't have time to get into that today, but just be aware that that's an option. And so certainly your client would want to contact an attorney professional to help them with the lockout if they chose to exercise that remedy. By the way, the short-term vacation rental agreement that's in your materials includes this clause, but I just wanted to point out that it's important that the rental agreement expressly provide that the owner reserves the right to perform a non-judicial lockout or eviction in the event of holdover, non-payment, or any other violation of the rental agreement. The Landlord-Tenant Act, we're saying, doesn't apply in these situations. The innkeeper statutes do apply. The innkeeper statutes are provided at ARS 33-301 at SEEK, and the innkeeper, there's nothing super relevant or different about the innkeeper statutes. I did want to highlight that they do provide no discrimination because of children. No discrimination. So anyway, none of us or any of our clients would ever discriminate anyways, but that's just key that's in there as well. All right, any questions? I'll take any questions real quick before I turn it over to Andrew to talk about the rental application process. Feel free to instant message. Just click on the forum tab.
Okay.
All right.
Well, the next part of our presentation is on the rental application and the background check. As we know, we're going to be giving up our properties or your client's properties to transients. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that those transients check out okay. That is typically done through a background check. The background check starts with an application for occupancy. In your materials, I believe in Exhibit 3, we've included the Arizona Association for Realtors form for an application for occupancy. In that application, requests a lot of general information. You want to know about a person's employment. You want to know about their residence history, particularly if you have any eviction history or any foreclosure history on that person's record. Also want to know about criminal activity. Important to know if there are any criminal violations, particularly in regard to damage, anything that would indicate that it appears like a transient could potentially cause damage to your property. But Perhaps one of the most important things, though, contained in that application for occupancy is on the last page. It's on lines 98 to 103. In that section, there is an authorization which allows you as the property owner to conduct the background check on the applicant. Very important that you have the authority to be able to get into that client's credit, get into that client's history, and really make a thorough evaluation as to whether it's appropriate to offer your property up to that particular person. So whatever form you use, make sure that it includes some ability for you to have the authorization to conduct that background check. So getting into the actual background checks with the amount of information that's now available online and through public records have really expanded in recent years. You can check, of course, criminal history, sex offender registries. You can even go as far as checking terrorist and most wanted lists to make sure that you don't have anybody who's wanted on an international level in your property. Eviction histories are now also available with the pulling in of more of the justice court records. Credit history, of course. Another big one you will want to look at is the applicant's income in relation to what you're charging for the property, which could be fairly significant based on what we found as the current rental rates. So want to take a careful look, make sure they can afford the property. And then looking at rental history to see if they have been evicted in the past or caused other problems as part of a rental as opposed to a transient lodging. In using that background check, great for you to set up a system. It can be anything you like. I recommended marking each background check as accepted, denied, or accepted with conditions, which would mean you may want to request more information from the applicant to see if they're appropriate to rent your property. Really important to use the same parameters in evaluating the applications because we do want to avoid any appearance of discrimination. That, of course, would open the door to additional problems, but as long as you have your set parameters that you're looking at in qualifying an applicant, apply those universally and keep track of your records, you're going to be in good shape. On another front, to help you avoid any problems, make sure you're not disclosing that credit report or any information that you receive from the applicant so that that doesn't go beyond you, doesn't create problems with disclosing information to any third parties. We've included some links on websites that you can use to get background evaluations. Every company checks different databases, has different price structures, different specialties, so good to check those out in advance of going ahead and listing your property so you know what resource you're going to go to when you do get an application in, and you can move on that quickly to make sure you ensure that you get your transients in time for the Super Bowl.
Speaking of transients, do I have time to share the story about Howard?
You do have time to share Howard.
Okay. So my brother Mike, along with everyone else, decided to get involved in real estate as an investment back in 05, 06, 07, and acquired a number of investment properties. And then when the market crashed, he fled to Hawaii to get involved in another venture out there. And so he asked me, his brother, to help him with the management of some of his rental properties. So he called me one day. I was working over in the Biltmore, and he said that he had a prospective tenant for one of his properties. He owned a couple units in the Landmark condos on Central and Camelback. A pretty swanky, nice place. He had a prospective tenant who wanted to lease one of the properties, and so he just put the prospective tenant in touch with me, gave him my cell phone number. One day I get a call. This guy's name's Howard, and he says, "Hey, your brother Mike gave me your information. I want to rent one of his properties. I don't need to see it. I already know I like it. I just want to meet you and just give you the deposit and give you the rental agreement." He says, "By the way, I don't have a car. Can I meet you at McDonald's?" So I said,
"That's good.
All right,
maybe he'll buy you lunch."
Yeah. It didn't work out that way. I thought just in the back of my mind, all right, that's already potential red flags. This is an expensive place. Most people in the valley have vehicles. So anyway, but I thought, I'm not going to judge or be I'm not gonna judge. I'm gonna reserve judgment until I meet him and do the background check and all the other due diligence. So I meet him at McDonald's. He shows up on his bicycle, and he looked like a transient. He looked like a transient, and he was actually missing 4 of his front teeth.
So he was a Coyotes player then, right?
No, he was not a hockey player. He was clearly not a hockey player. He was smaller, much smaller than I am. But I thought, that's a little unusual. No car, no teeth. I'm sure maybe he's got a good job. So I asked him what his employment situation is, and no steady employment. All he can say is that he has regular income, and would show us, his income for the past, 6 months. So I relay all this information to my brother Mike, and I say, Mike, all kinds of red flags. I think you want to do some very serious due diligence on this guy if you're going to rent at all. And my brother was in a huge hurry and just advised me to take his money and give him the keys. So against my advice, we rented to him without doing any type of background check or anything like that. And sure enough, 6 months later, actually it was probably more like 3 months later, my brother was calling me to evict the guy because he was harassing the neighbors, doing all kinds of weird things, and then caused a chemical fire in the unit and burned the carpet and a bunch of the fixtures and things like that. So that's good advice that Andrew's sharing with you. Anything else on background check?
No, it just brings up the importance, too, of you have all the data, but nothing really can give you a good evaluation like that personal touch. Tough to do in this situation for a transient type agreement, since the people are likely going to be coming from out of town. But with the ability to web conference, get on the phone with somebody, that can be an additional tool that you can utilize to really evaluate who you're allowing access to your property to.
I totally agree. Andrew and I were talking about that this morning. I think with technology now, with Skype and FaceTime and things like that, particularly if you're representing a client that's wanting to rent out their $10 million mansion in Paradise Valley, I would want to have some type of face-to-face contact, feel the people out before handing them over the keys. But I think that's true for even $100,000 property and
Absolutely.
Surprise. Let's talk about the short-term lease. If you flip to your materials, let's see, what exhibit is it? It's Exhibit 8, the vacation rental agreement. We're going to run through that, and I just want to touch on some of the material provisions that you or your clients are going to want to make sure are included in the rental agreement. And some of these, might be a little bit different than you would have in your standard lease agreement. So first off, we want it to qualify as transient lodging. I think it's going to, just as a matter of necessity or as a practical matter, anybody that, we're talking about the Super Bowl rentals right now. Anybody that's renting in January, February, it's probably going to be weekly rentals, maybe 2 weeks, at most 4 weeks. So I don't think that's going to be a problem, but I would include some type of language, in the first section of the rental agreement to expressly state that the term is going to be for X number of days or X number of weeks, bracket or parentheses, not to exceed 4 weeks. We're going to talk about the tax issues in just a couple of minutes, but in order to take advantage of the federal income tax exception, the rental period needs to be less than 15 days, so be aware of that. Also, I think I mentioned earlier that we want to put into the rental agreement express language that provides that in the event of a holdover, breach, non-payment, the owner reserves the right to do a non-judicial lockout. We also want to put in there that the parties expressly recognize and agree that the relationship is governed by the innkeeper statutes and not by the Arizona Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. I just realized I flipped over a statute earlier that I should have mentioned. It's in the materials. Yeah, ARS 33-1377. Nope, that's the wrong one. ARS 33-361. If the Landlord-Tenant Act doesn't apply, that's the statute that gives the owner the right to non-judicially evict. All right, let's take a look at, I don't know if you're following along in the lease or page 7. I want to talk about provisions that give the owner the right to terminate the lease and I think it's helpful to put those right into the rental agreement. Obviously, failure to pay. In our situations, the way I've drafted the lease or the rental agreement, what I suggest is that we receive payment up front. Actually, half of the payment now, half of the payment to take the property off the market, and the other half of the payment 30 days before the term begins. So I think that, and I know that owners can demand those type of terms because of the demand right now. So put that in there, that payment is provided up front. So actually that should not even be an issue, a violation or breach of the rental agreement because of non-payment, because we're getting paid up front. The exception would be if the vacationers, the transients, get in there and they say, wow, this is fantastic. The weather here is great. We can play golf. We want to stay another week. Then again, I guess that would be the exception, but I would try to get that paid up front. Occupancy limits, that's going to be a big one next January, February, because a lot of people are going to be coming out here just for a big party and bringing probably 10, 20 people with them. And I don't think that you want to have a party house, and your neighbors definitely don't want you to have a party house. So I would build in there express occupancy limits. Probably 10 is a reasonable number from the people I've spoken with, the realtors. So I would put in there if the owner finds out there's more than 10 people, it's a violation, they're done. What else was I going to say? Something else I was going to say about that. It'll come to me in a minute. We'll get to it. Security deposit. We mentioned that the Landlord-Tenant Act doesn't apply. The owner can require a larger security deposit. Andrew and I were talking about that last week. Even though you're getting paid up front, you still want to have some type of security deposit to protect the owner in the event that they break the stereo equipment or damage anything in the property. So you want to build that right in there.
Certainly. Without the Arizona Landlord-Tenant Act applying, that security deposit should really be tailored to what is in the home, the amenities in the home, the potential for damage, to make sure that you do have a quick recourse to recoup any damages. And if you've rented this property out to multiple groups of people, you want to make sure you have the funds available to make repairs so that the next set of transients coming in can have the same experience, and you won't end up crediting rent money back at that point as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going along with that, you're also going to want to have a cleaning fee, redecorating fee, to make sure that that's all paid for, again, to get the place turned around to rent to the next vacationer. Use of the premises, we want to expressly limit the use, and that's just going to be again, to no more than 10 people for residential purposes only. No subletting or assignments, expressly put that in the lease. And you want to include a good set of rules and regulations. I gave some examples in the lease there at Exhibit 8, but you can tailor that however you like and build in your own personal family's rules and regulations for how the house should be used. Of course, no smoking in the property, no pets unless you want to try and pad the revenue by allowing pets, just including a pet fee. I've noticed a lot of nice resorts nowadays and nice rental properties do authorize pets. It's kind of weird walking around the Four Seasons and seeing little chihuahuas in the hallways, but it's not uncommon, especially in Scottsdale. Is there any place in America that has more pets than Scottsdale, do you think?
It would be tough.
Maybe Beverly Hills, or
possibly
someplace in Southern California. So I don't know. You might scare away a lot of people if you don't include pets. Cancellation fee we talked about. Oh, I didn't talk about that. I built into the lease here that if they cancel anytime, what did I say? Prior to or after 30 days, it's oh, I know what it is. The first half of the payment that's due immediately at the lease execution, that's non-refundable. You're taking it off the market, non-refundable, so even if they cancel next week after they pay, I would suggest that's non-refundable. Okay. Incidentals, ancillary charges, another opportunity to increase the revenues. You can build into the lease that the transient lodger has the opportunity to, rent bicycles from you, rent the car in the garage. I've seen some investors actually offering to stock the fridge with beer and steaks and things like that, which is kind of a cool idea, just a convenience charge. All right, let's talk briefly about the short-term rental tax. So I mentioned there's a transient lodging, it's called the transaction privilege tax that applies to transient lodging. I included the table of the various rental rates for the different municipalities in the valley, so you can take a look at that. It gets up pretty high. In Phoenix, for example, when you add up the taxes, I think it's a little over 12% of the rent. But that only applies for transient lodging. This doesn't apply if it's longer than 30 days. There is a tax, of course, a rental tax for 30 days or more, but it's more like, I think, 2 or 4% versus 12%. But that's in your materials. There's also an additional tax on goods and services. So I mentioned if you want to rent your bicycle or car or any other services, there's an additional tax on those goods as well, and there's a chart and table that outlines what those are. Okay, last issue on tax. I want to make sure that we save time for Andrew to talk about VRBO. I think that's, I definitely want to hear about that. He's going to tell us what some of the properties in the Valley and Maricopa County, what those are renting for. So I want to hear that information, make sure we save time for that. I mentioned that there's a federal tax exemption on rental income. There is a tax that, of course, there's income tax on rents received regarding properties, and especially concerning rental properties. There is an exception regarding your principal residence that applies that there's no taxable income on renting your personal residence as long as you rent it for less than 15 days, so 2 weeks or less. No, you do not have to report that income, and that's at 26 USC Section 280, Section A. So if it's 14 days or less, you don't have to report that as income. Okay, let me see if we have, I think we have just a couple minutes to get to a couple of questions here. Andrew, the question is, can neighbors share information on bad tenants or bad applicants with other neighbors? Can investors or owners, share information on bad renters with others in the community?
Certainly. There's a big difference between disclosing what you were authorized to gather about the applicant from their background check versus your personal dealings with that particular applicant or tenant or transient. Certainly if you have firsthand knowledge of what a person has done to your home or how they've acted in a given proposed rental or transient lodging, you're absolutely able to share that with your neighbors. Give them the heads up to avoid or go ahead with somebody.
Perfect. Thank you. I do want to mention one thing. Thank you for the reminder. We included in your materials a form, the application form, prepared by the Arizona Association of Realtors, and that form is licensed and limited to realtors, to members of AAR only. So that form is just for demonstrative purposes only.
Right, and that form is more broad than what you need for a short-term, few-week rental, but
okay.
Certainly a good place to start from and narrow back.
And somebody online emailed that the citation for the Horton versus Harstook case isn't in the materials. I have it in the materials in front of me on page 4, but anyway, in case you don't have it, it's Horton versus Harstook, HARTSOOK. That's at 2009 WL 2244503. Andrew, tell us what's going on with VRBO.
So VRBO, we're not specifically recommending that that's the platform that you should use, but we have had clients who have had great success with it, and it sets up a nice structure for you to be able to easily get your property information out on the web, upload some photos, and really make it available right away for transients to look at potentially occupying. So to use it, it's a very straightforward setup. The biggest thing just from a marketing standpoint that's going to get your property occupied is going to be the photos. So while you can go out and take pictures with your iPhone and do the best you can to get a few photos online, you really want to make sure that those look fantastic. They're not cluttered. The house is clean, so that it really puts your property out with the best foot forward, best chance of getting occupied versus the other competitors out there. On VRBO, another nice feature of it is that the cost is very reasonable when you look at, okay, I'm using this platform and I'm going to get some pretty significant rents. Flat fee for a year of $349 or 10% per booking. When I give you some of the rental figures, if you're considering going ahead and allowing your property out for occupancy, you're probably going to see pretty quick that a 10% per booking is not the route to go. The other nice thing on VRBO is you can set forth all of the policies, procedures, your rental agreements, minimum stays, of course the dollar figures attached to each night or each week with the occupancy. So very straightforward. Again, feel free to use whatever platform that you like. The more professional platform that you use, the more professional type of transient that you are going to receive looking at that property.
So would you discourage Craigslist?
I would encourage Craigslist for selling my couch, but I'm not sure that in this particular type of transaction it's the right fit to get a true professional, a true good family coming in to really be here for the right events and not have concerns about damaging your property. So as far as the actual figures, I took a look this morning at some of the numbers for a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath house, pretty standard size house throughout Arizona. Looking at the end of January through the beginning of February, a couple-week rental period. I'm just going to pull out some neighborhoods and show you what people are offering their properties for at this time, so you can get an idea on why this might be a good avenue for you. So if you look at Scottsdale, you pick out McCormick Ranch. Pretty common to see $3,500 a week. If we're looking at an apartment up in Troon, $2,000 to $2,500. Really nice homes in Paradise Valley, $10,000 to $40,000, fairly common. Saw one at $80,000. That was obviously a much larger home.
You'd want to meet that person or Skype them.
I think that would be some due diligence on that end. Mesa, even out in the East Valley, people offering $1,000 to $2,000 a week. Then you get over to Glendale, where the Super Bowl is going to be. Lowest I saw was $2,000 a week. More on average, $5,000, $10,000 not being unheard of, or rates starting at $500 a night and up. So when you look at, there's really a good 8-week period in February and January of 2015 that look like they're going to be primed for renting. And you take, let's use a figure of $2,000 a week. If you get all 8 weeks rented, you're looking at $16,000 just off the start. And of course, those figures can increase with the convenience fees, increased offering prices, and whatever the best fit is for your particular property. Just make sure when you're looking at whatever site or whatever resources to get your property out there, you do have resources available in real estate agents, but you also have the ability to go ahead and look at, here's what everybody else is offering, here are the terms, here's where my property fits in and gives me a great chance of getting this occupied and adding a little extra cash after the holidays, recover from all those Christmas presents. So
good point. Good point. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to email me or call me if you have any follow-up questions after today. If anybody has, I think we have 1 minute. If anybody has any other last questions or comments. Andrew, can people email you or call?
Absolutely. Feel free to email or call. Happy to answer any questions that we can.
All right. Wonderful. Well.